Today we are looking at a case from the second part of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to Canada. Patrick Wheelan was born around 1840 in County Galway, situated on the west coast of Ireland. His parents were William Whelan and Mary Sullivan, and although not very well off, they encouraged their children to study. From 1811, the Society for the Promotion of the Education of the Poor of Ireland had started to establish a nationwide network of non-profit, non-denominational schools, in part funded through the production and sale of textbooks. By 1831, they were operating 1,621 primary schools and educating approximately 140,000 pupils. When Patrick was 5 years old, there was a terrible famine in Ireland as a potato crop failed, and this lasted until 1852. As a direct consequence of the famine, Ireland's population of almost 8.4 million in 1844 fell to 6.6 million by 1851. This was due to both death caused by starvation and emigration to other countries. Between 1841 and 1850, 49% of the total number of immigrants to the United States were Irish. When Patrick was 14 years old, he became an apprentice to a tailor. He learned his trade well and was considered to be a good and hard-working young man. Things were going well for him until his elder brother named Jack was arrested, as it was alleged that he had committed arson against a police station in Tallaght. Jack was one of the many Irish people who opposed British rule in Ireland. Following this, Patrick resigned from his position and left the country. At first he went to England, before travelling to Canada in 1865. He arrived in Quebec City and found work as a tailor. Soon after, he joined the volunteer cavalry and fought against the Fenians. The Fenians were members of a movement who wanted to secure Ireland's independence from Britain. They were mainly based in the United States, but in 1866 they started to launch a series of armed raids in the British province of Canada. They planned to seize territory by force and then ransom it back to the British in exchange for Ireland's independence. One of these incursions happened in June 1866, when some 1,300 Fenian soldiers captured Fort Erie in southern Ontario before being forced to retreat back to the United States. At the time, it was estimated that there were around 250,000 Irish Catholics living in Canada. Of those, less than 3,000 were believed to be associated with the Fenians, but many more were sympathetic to the cause. Patrick fought against them, but some of his actions actually led the military leaders to believe that his sympathies actually lay with the Fenians. He was arrested and questioned, but with no evidence against him, he was soon released. He was, however, discharged from his duties. Patrick then travelled to America before returning to Canada. He went to Montreal and on the 13th of February 1867 married a lady named Bridget Boyle. She was originally from County Kenny in Ireland and older than Patrick. She was also relatively wealthy. Some considered it strange that a well-off, upper-class lady would marry a tailor who had been discharged from the volunteer cavalry, but the couple seemed happy and following the marriage went to live in Ottawa. Patrick's skills were in high demand and he soon found employment as a tailor. Another Irishman who had left his homeland and travelled to Canada was a politician named Thomas D'Arcy McGee. He was born in 1825 in the town of Carlingford, in the northeast of Ireland. But when he was still very young, his family moved to the town of Wexford, in the southeast of the country. Here his father, James McGee, worked as a coastguard. Thomas's mother died in 1833, when he was just 8 years old. He very much liked to study and was sent to a hedge school. At the time, Catholic faith schools were not allowed, so hedge schools had started to emerge, where children of Catholic parents could be educated. These, however, were illegal, and classes were usually held in a house or a barn. In 1831, the British government appointed a Commissioner of National Education, whose task was to assist in primary school construction, teacher training, the production of textbooks, and the funding of teachers. and following this, the number of hedge schools started to decline. Thomas was a very good student and became very interested in learning about the British rule in Ireland, something that he very much opposed. However, in 1840, his father remarried, and both he and his sister found their stepmother to be a difficult woman. So in 1842, when Thomas was 17 years old, he boarded the ship Leo and, accompanied by his sister, sailed from Wexford Harbour to the United States. He found work at a Catholic newspaper named the Boston Pilot and wrote articles about the movement for Irish self-determination. He supported the union of Canada into the United States and once said, either by purchase, conquest or stipulation, Canada must be yielded by Great Britain to this republic. He was promoted to lead editor in 1844. The following year he returned to Ireland and worked with the weekly newspaper The Nation, but in 1848 he was implicated in the failed Irish Rebellion and, disguised as a priest, returned to the United States, where he established two newspapers, the New York Nation and the American Celt. While in Ireland, he married a local girl named Mary Theresa Caffrey, and they went on to have 6 children together, but tragically, only 2 daughters survived into adulthood. Thomas gradually came to the opinion that peaceful reforms were the best way forward for Ireland, and in 1857 he moved to Canada, where he began a career in public life. A year later, in 1858, he was elected to the Legislative Assembly, and in 1863 he became the Minister of Agriculture in the Canadian Conservative government. He worked for the creation of an independent Canada. Following the Confederation of Canada, he was elected to the first Canadian Parliament in 1867. However, he had lost much of his Irish Catholic support and had upset many of the Fenians, as he did not support their methods of violence to try and gain an independent Ireland. Many saw him as a traitor. They also did not like that he had said that Canada under the British Crown was a better place for Irish immigrants to settle than the United States. On the 31st of December 1867, 2 gentlemen arrived at his home. They wanted to inform him that there was a plot to burn his house down, and it would be carried out at 4 a.m. Thomas asked the gentlemen if they would tell the police, and gave one of them a note to show the officer on duty. One of the gentlemen was believed to be Patrick Wheelan. The note requested that 2 policemen be sent to protect his house and his family. However, the note was not delivered to the police station until 4:45 a.m, which would have been after the attack was supposed to have taken place. Fortunately, the threat was not carried out. 3 months later, in the early hours of April the 7th, 1868, Thomas left the Parliament building after a debate that had gone on past midnight. He slowly walked towards a boarding house where he was staying in Ottawa's Spark Street. The landlady was Mrs. Mary Ann Trotter. She had not yet gone to bed, as she was waiting for her son to return, who also worked in the Parliament buildings. When she heard Thomas arriving, she opened the door. He was smoking a cigar. Suddenly she heard a loud noise. Thomas Darcy McGee fell to the ground. He had been shot. As the assassin disappeared into the dark Ottawa streets, Mrs. Trotter screamed and passers-by rushed to the scene, but they quickly realised that the gentleman lying on the ground was dead. Police immediately started searching for the person responsible for the shooting. They targeted known Fenian sympathisers and quickly arrested the most prominent, one of whom was a man named Patrick Buckley, who was employed as a stable hand to the Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald. Patrick Buckley gave the police the name of Patrick Wheelan. Thinking they now knew who the assassin was, officers went out into the streets to find him, but Patrick Wheelan had not gone anywhere. He was at his lodgings at the Stark's Tavern. When they located him, the police searched his person. In his pockets, they found a fully loaded Smith & Wesson revolver. Powder residue suggested that it had been fired within the last 48 hours. Other items found included a box of cartridges, an Irish-American newspaper, and a green silk badge of the Toronto Hibernian Benevolent Society. The police continued the investigation. They were told that Patrick Wheelan had watched Thomas Darcy McGee from the visitors' gallery at the House of Commons on the night he was shot. He was also identified by Thomas Darcy McGee's half-brother as the man who had come to the house the previous New Year's Eve to warn them of the imminent arson attack, although he had given an assumed name. On the 9th of April, Patrick Wheelan was charged with murder. 4 days later, on the 13th of April, a state funeral was held for Thomas Darcy McGee, and an estimated crowd of 80,000 people came onto the streets to see the procession. There was much political interest in the trial. After all, Thomas Darcy McGee was a highly regarded politician and a personal friend of the Prime Minister, who for some strange reason was given permission to sit beside the judge, William Buell Richards, throughout the trial. The defence was led by a Protestant named John Hilliard Cameron, while the prosecutor was an Irish Catholic named James O'Reilly. On the first day, the defendant sat with folded arms and ate apples while listening to the trial proceedings. The defence called a 14-year-old girl who worked at the Star Tavern, where Patrick had been arrested. Her name was Eliza Tierney. She said that the defendant had taken a room at the tavern, and at the time of his arrest had been there for about 6 weeks. She was aware that he owned a pistol and testified that it had been fired the day before Thomas Darcy McGee had been murdered, as one of the other servant girls had handled the pistol while cleaning the room and accidentally shot herself in the arm. A bookkeeper named William Gordon told the court that Patrick Wheelan had offered to sell him the pistol a few weeks before the murder. A tailor from Montreal named Joseph Faulkner said that Patrick Wheelan had been upset with Thomas Darcy McGee during the election season, but he had never known him to have ever had any connections with the Fenians. Mr. Faulkner was an interesting witness, as although his testimony was favourable to the defendant, other witnesses had said that Patrick Wheelan had no interest in politics, while according to Mr. Faulkner, this was not the case. There were those who claimed that the government had offered money to witnesses to testify for the prosecution, so the judge requested that they all swear whether or not they had received any money for their testimony before giving it to the court. Patrick Wheelan proclaimed his innocence throughout the trial. When the trial ended and the closing addresses were made, the defence said that they did not believe any man had ever before been given a trial under circumstances so unfairly arrayed in prejudice against him. They also reminded the jury of other cases where the defendant had been found guilty and executed, only to be exonerated later when the actual perpetrator of the crime had been found. The prosecution, however, reminded the jury that a public servant had been murdered and not to stretch their imagination as society looks for justice. The jury were then sent out to deliberate. They returned to find the defendant guilty, and the judge sentenced Patrick Wheelan to death. When asked if he had anything to say, Patrick replied, "I am held to be a murderer. I am here standing on the brink of my grave, and I wish to declare to you and to my God that I am innocent, that I never committed this deed." The defence appealed the verdict to the Court of the Queen's Bench of Ontario, but the judge who presided over the first case, William Buell Richards, had recently been named Chief Justice of the court, so he cast the deciding vote in the court's 2-1 decision against the appeal. The defence team appealed again, this time to the Ontario Court of Appeal. This court, however, included the same judge, William Buell Richards, and the other 2 judges from the Court of the Queen's Bench of Ontario. The appeal was rejected by 6 votes to 4. On the 11th of February 1869, Patrick Wheelan was hanged in front of 5,000 spectators. As he waited at the scaffold, he told the crowd that he was innocent, but that he did know who had shot Thomas Darcy McGee. His last words were, "God save Ireland, and God save my soul." He was the last person to be publicly hanged in Canada. His widow Bridget moved back to Montreal and lived a solitary life. To this day, many people believe that Patrick Wheelan was innocent of the crime for which he was found guilty and hanged. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. This case has actually been my most requested case in the last few months. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next brief case.